Okay guys, so kettlebell swings. Variation on the hip hinge movement that centers around explosive action of the hip extensor muscles, so your glutes, hamstrings and so on. It's a fantastic exercise for not only building strength within the hip joint but also work capacity and overall conditioning. So you want to start with the kettlebell out in front of you, about a foot away. Initiate the hip hinge position, so sit your hips back as if you're closing a set of drawers behind you, and keeping your abs tight and your back nice and flat. You're just going to reach forward and grab the kettlebell. From here, just pull and pass the kettlebell underneath your hips and then rapidly drive upwards, pushing your hips forward. Now the main focus is the movement of the hip joint, not the movement of the kettlebell. So we tend to use the cue that your hips are pushing the kettlebell forward rather than lifting it up with your arms. It also doesn't matter too much how high the kettlebell goes. People often make the mistake of lifting it right above the heads. You're simply driving your hips forward, squeezing your glutes and pushing the kettlebell out in front of you, and then from here pulling it back down underneath your hip joint, letting your hips sit back and returning back to the start position by driving your hips forward. Main focus is to keep your abs tight, relax your arms and keep your weight distribution over the middle of your foot. A good cue to see that you are using your hips effectively is if you pull the weight down harder on each rep, you shouldn't feel like you're going to lose your balance. If you feel like you're going to fall forward or backwards, it's because you're using your lower back and your arms rather than your hip joint. So you should be centered and rooted to the ground over the middle of your foot, simply sinking your hips back with the kettlebell underneath your hip joint and then driving forward and squeezing your glutes at the top of each rep. This exercise is also performed for time or really high reps, so make sure you're focusing on your form throughout the course of the whole set. So the tall kneeling press. It's a vertical pushing variation that emphasises core stability but doesn't necessarily allow for the same amount of compensations that we see with exercises like the standing military press. Now you want to do this exercise on your knees, so I'd recommend placing a pad or a soft cushion underneath your knee joints, as it can often be uncomfortable to rest on your knees. You want to hold a dumbbell in each hand. Bringing the dumbbells up to your chest, you want to assume a tall athletic posture. So what we tend to see when people position themselves on the knees is they can't get full hip extension due to tightness around their quads and hips. So just make sure that you're reinforcing that throughout the course of the movement. So squeezing your glutes and drawing your stomach in, making sure that your hips are stacked on top of the knee joint and your shoulders are over your hips. Keeping your elbows underneath your wrists, and again reinforcing that tall posture. You want to press the weights overhead. Now again, as soon as you initiate the press, a common compensation that we tend to see with people in any vertical pushing movement is hyperextending their lower back, so arching through the lower back. But obviously when you're on your knees and we're challenging that stability a little bit, when you do that, your centre of mass will shift a little bit more, so you're more likely to lose your balance. So it can be much harder to press within this position, so the weight will be significantly lighter. But again, just focus on control, focus on reinforcing all the postural points that we talked about, pressing the weights until your arms are fully extended and the knuckles are in line with the back of your head, and then slowly lower back down to the start position and repeat.